today, and here is his report of that first time in the sky.
The fifth busiest airport in the U.S. didn't look so busy Thursday morning as the nation's airlines struggled to regain their wings. One reason, no more curbside check-in. Bags must go to the counter. So now the crowds are inside. That's where I was, trying to get on a flight to Salt Lake City, Utah. It's about 2 hours before our plane takes off, and the line of passengers here is about as long as a football field. We're not even sure the plane's going to be taking off. I did see a crew starting to go through the gate. That's encouraging.
I'm not going to believe we're going until I'm on the flight and we take off the runway.
The FAA now requires airlines to scrutinize passengers more carefully. Some changes are apparent. One new question, do you have any sharp objects like knives or scissors?
They took my scissors away.
At the check-in?
I guess my scissors was too pointy at the top.
In addition to ID checks, some bags apparently picked at random are hand searched, and only ticketed passengers allowed into the gate area. Less obvious changes, all aircraft must now be thoroughly checked for explosives before they're put into service for the day. The airlines are no longer permitted to carry cargo or mail within the continental U.S., except for the U.S. military. But with the tragedy in New York City still unfolding, no one seems to mind the delays and a little hassle.
You keep remembering so many people have it so much worse. I mean, this is nothing. You know, if you don't get out today, I don't get out today. At least I'm here and not there. So.
Some say Americans haven't paid enough attention to airline security.
We want things very convenient. We're a convenience-oriented people, and you can't have secure convenience.
Finally, after 3 hours to check in, we're off. Delta Flight 2027, a short 80-minute hop, which surprisingly is nearly empty, just 25 passengers. I wonder how many were left at the airport still in line. All in all, our short trip was uneventful. A little longer, a few more questions than normal, but for a while at least, nothing about U.S. air travel will be normal. James Hattori, CNN, Salt Lake City, Utah.
Obviously, just one quick point to make on that. Things move, when they move today, a little more quickly than they're going to move when you get thousands of people and air traffic gets back to its normal levels. That's when things are really going to get a little sticky, and so, or a lot sticky. One airline official told us the other day that 2 hours is not an unreasonable time to give yourself to get to the airport, and don't even think you can make the flight by running through the airport 15, 20 minutes beforehand. About half past the hour, 11:32 now. Quick look at where we've been and where we are headed here on this special report tonight. CNN has learned at least 8 people were arrested at New York's LaGuardia and John F. Kennedy airports amid concerns over a threat of yet another hijacking. 4 of them had been challenged at one of the airports on Tuesday morning, came back to JFK tonight and were taken into custody. They are being held for carrying fake documents. At the Pentagon, new flames late tonight coming from the wreckage of the plane crash there on Tuesday as crews continued to search for 126 people still believed missing in the rubble at the Pentagon. That fire still burns. It had been quiet there. And in New York, hundreds of family and friends of those missing from the World Trade Center are lined up at the city armory in a scene that will break your heart. They are waiting to register their loved ones on a missings list, clinging to pictures, desperately hoping someone will have some information, some word on the whereabouts of their missing friend or husband or boyfriend, girlfriend, what have you. The armory staying open 24 hours a day. Quick update of where we've been. Search efforts have uncovered the flight data recorder now for the hijacked airliner that crashed in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh on Tuesday. CNN's David Mattingly is standing by, Somerset County, Pennsylvania, with more on that. David, what can you tell us?
Aaron, this slow and meticulous crash investigation took a big step forward today with the discovery of the flight data recorder. According to the FBI, the device was discovered inside the impact crater. That's the large blackened pit that was created when Flight 93 crashed here Tuesday morning. The device now destined for Washington, D.C. for further examination. The flight data recorder is important because it will allow investigators to retrace the functions of the aircraft prior to the crash. Word of its discovery came after it was learned today that small charred pieces of wreckage are now turning up in towns here as far as 8 miles away from the crash site. More indications of just how powerful the force behind this crash and explosion truly was. The recovery of the flight data recorder raises hopes here at the crash site of a quick recovery of the next important piece of evidence, the cockpit voice recorder. That device could tell us what was happening with the people on the aircraft, what was happening after those heart-wrenching phone calls from passengers aware of what the terrorists were planning to do, saying that they were planning to fight back, to challenge the 4 hijackers who had taken their airplane. A heroic scenario that could explain why the plane crashed here instead of continuing on to Washington, D.C. and to targets like the White House, the Capitol building, or maybe even Air Force One. For now, the search continues and will begin anew in the morning, as well as the painful process of recovering and identifying the remains of the 45 people who were on board. Aaron?
Any idea? Well, I have a couple things actually. Any idea when we will hear what is on that flight data recorder? I know they have it. I suspect it's not going to be tomorrow. Do you have any feel for that?
The FBI is running this investigation here as a crime scene, and they are strictly by the book. They are not speculating about anything. So no word on how long it might be before we get any kind of information back. The NTSB will be here tomorrow, and they might be able to answer those questions for us.
And you know, one of the great mysteries here is where that plane was in fact headed. Anything new on that? Have you picked up anything there on what the target might have been? And
Absolutely not.
Okay.
The focus has been entirely on what's going on here, and there has been a great deal of determination and resolve to stay concentrated on the task at hand. And it is a daunting task because it is a very large area, and there are very, very small pieces of wreckage that they have to try and locate.
David, thank you. I apologize there for blindsiding you. I didn't mean to do that. Thank you. It's just one of those days where I haven't had a chance to talk to everybody tonight, and sometimes those things happen. We want to turn a corner here, take a look at how the United States might respond to what has happened, and perhaps how the United States should respond. Peter Bergen is a CNN terrorism analyst, and he joins us. Also, William Luers is with us as well to join in this conversation. Good evening to you. You have been patiently waiting in this hot room tonight. And Peter, I know you're there. And Mr. Luers, wait another minute for me. Let me start with Peter. Peter, if you had to bet here, what do you think the response, how massive the response are we going to see?
Well, let me say that I met with bin Laden in 1997 in Afghanistan, and if a military operation is being contemplated to take him out or snatch him in some way, that would be an operation that would encounter considerable resistance for the following reasons. Bin Laden, when I met with him, was surrounded by a group of at least a couple of dozen heavily armed men who are armed with RPGs and Russian submachine guns. They're highly motivated, they're prepared to die, and that was just in the course of just doing an interview. Obviously, bin Laden must be very concerned about his security right now, and he has hundreds of followers who might be surrounding him. Also, any American military operation in Afghanistan would be conducted in some of the most inhospitable terrain in the world. It's a rocky, mountainous, desert region. It's an area with which bin Laden is very familiar, and with which Americans aren't very familiar. The last time America had a presence in Afghanistan was in 1989. Since then, the embassy there has been closed. So the information the United States has about the country is secondhand and old. Aaron.
And so that kind of surgical mission, go in there and get him, if that's what we're talking about, would be very difficult to do. And in fact, the United States hadn't had a whole lot of success with that sort of operation.
Well, let's think about Somalia, where 18 American servicemen died in a very intense two-day firefight. We were trying to snatch or kill Mohammed Aidid, the clan leader there, if you remember, in 1993. That was an unmitigated disaster. This would be much tougher, I think, because A, there's no element of surprise. Bin Laden knows that we're coming after him, and B, it's a country in Somalia there were 28,000 American soldiers who had been there for several months, and this is not going to be the situation in Afghanistan. We're going to go in, we're going to not know much about this. If we do go in, we're not going to know much about the terrain. And we're going to be faced with people whose main mission in life is to die. I mean, these people want to die. They think they're instantly going to paradise, and they're very prepared to die for their leader.
Mr. Lourdes here. What's your fear? What's your worst fear in all this?
My fear is that we will come off to the world as trigger happy rather than intelligent, resolved, and determined to get this done.
Well,
Let me just say, when the Second World War began, after Pearl Harbor, we first had to figure out how we're going to defend our country at home, get our security in place. Then we had to build a capacity to do that, to take on the Japanese and the Germans. And we didn't have the capacity for either one. And it took time. That war took 4 years. And I would argue that this is so serious, and this is so long-term, that we need to develop the capacity, which is really anti-American, to deal with this type of challenge to our society. The airplane thing is only one small element of dealing with the threat of terrorism in our society. And then secondly, we have to begin to develop the type of intelligence capacity that will enable us to deal with the broad issue. It's not just Osama bin Laden. It's a huge problem.
But look, tell me if you think this is fair, that there are really two issues on the table tonight. There is the issue of who committed this atrocity. That's issue number one. And what are we going to do about that? And that plays to, it is connected to issue number two, which is the broader question of how does our nation, how do all nations, all civilized, responsible nations, however you want to put it, how do they deal with this broader problem of terrorism? But why do you think it's necessary to link them? Why not deal with one at a time?
Because this network is not just Osama bin Laden. It's a network that has penetrated our society, the Middle East, but Europe, and they're everywhere. And I don't believe for a minute that the thousands of people out there will be affected if we kill, if we're able to kill, and as you just heard, it's going to be very difficult to do that, Osama bin Laden. I mean, this isn't about revenge. This is about winning. And I think it's going to take a long time. It's not simply who did that. Many of the people who did it are now dead. They died in those aircraft. Who planned it? It's probably much more difficult to find that out. And I'm merely suggesting that as angry as this city is and this country is, and as ready as we are to be awakened to the fact that there's a world out there that we've got to understand better and deal with better, and that there's a world in here that we have to protect better, that we've got to take our time at doing that. This isn't about a trigger-happy America. This is about a determined, powerful, intelligent America.
We have pretty angry America.
We have to think better than this guy does and these people do, and we have to shoot better. And I think it's going to take us a while. And I, for one, am not anxious to drop bombs and shoot at people. I think we should root out these problems wherever they are in our society, build up our forces, and develop our intelligence capacity so that over the next, I think it'll take a couple of years to get this thing resolved. And we've got to be ready for that. This is a long struggle.
Just, Peter, quickly before you get away, I wonder, just in 20 seconds or so, if you agree with that what we're looking at, if the world is looking at eliminating terrorism, and I must admit, that sounds like a pretty tall task to me, if you think it's possible at all.
Well, if we're talking about, let's say, just eliminating Osama bin Laden, obviously that would have some effect on his network, which is clearly the main terrorist threat the United States faces, because he has a certain charismatic presence and he's regarded as a leader. But the inherent problems wouldn't go away. There's a set of people who are opposed to United States policies in the Middle East, and those people aren't going to magically change their views overnight if their leader is assassinated or magically dies of some mysterious illness. So I think I would agree largely this is a long-term thing. Eliminating him tomorrow would certainly solve some short-term problems, but it wouldn't be the end of the whole story.
Peter, thanks. Good to talk to you again. Mr. Lourdes, nice to meet you. the UN Association, the chairman thereof. Appreciate you coming in and your patience today.
Thank you.
It's a very provocative way to look at this. It's probably healthy to get it on the table as well. It is particularly healthy, I think,